And members, I'll move that House File 505 be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. And welcome to the committee, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee, appreciate the opportunity to present House File 505 to you. This is a bill that idea that came to me several years ago, back in 2017. The two young gentlemen to the left of me here contacted me with concerns about how boring our state flag was and how it really doesn't fit how a state flag should be designed, how flags should be done these days. And that was part of a school project they had. So lo and behold, a school project that they started 2 years ago where they had to contact the representative has now turned to the point where they're able to present to another committee here at the Minnesota House. The idea was to originally create a state task force, and this is what the bill does, is create a state task force to look at the state flag and figure out is there a better design that we should be using. And it's directing the task force to come together, bring in experts who deal with flag issues. I can't pronounce the word. Fortunately, these two gentlemen can. And what it will do is it would ask for a report to come back to the legislature by January 15th of 2021. The task force itself would not change the state flag, but it would make recommendations to the state legislature, and then the state legislature would be able to act on it. At this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to my testifiers here. The first testifier will be Mr. Tom Akins, and I will turn it over to him at this point to start the presentation.
And Mr. Akins, if you can, and Mr. Kalkman, if you can introduce yourselves for the tape, state your name for the tape, and then proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Thomas Atkins. I'm a student at the University of Minnesota, and we thank you for the opportunity to present our take on the current state flag. Good design, whether it be a logo, architecture, or a flag, often captures our interest, and, when done correctly, can be an instantly recognizable symbol of a concept or place. Citizens in a region with a well-designed flag often feel proud to be under the flag and what it represents. For example, Chicago's flag is the platonic ideal of a flag that inspires citizen pride. The flag's success is measured by its omnipresence. It is seen both flying from buildings and on souvenir merchandise. The citizens of Chicago clearly take great pride in their flag and revere it to the point where police officers are often buried with the Chicago flag rather than the American flag. Respect for a flag is strongly correlated with good design, and so in order to understand why some flags are seen more frequently than others, we turn to NAVA, or the North American Vexillological Association's 5 Principles of Flag Design. These principles were compiled by Ted Kaye, a vexillologist, or one who studies flags, by observing patterns in flags that were flown with pride, compared to flags that were all but unknown from disuse. The first guideline is arguably the most important when evaluating designs. Keep it simple enough that a child could draw it from memory. Simple shapes and patterns not only allow the flag to be recreated and recognized easily, but also reduce costs of production. While using simple shapes and colors, one must also use meaningful symbolism to illustrate what the flag stands for. The symbolism should be widely recognizable by citizens, yet clearly understood from an outside perspective. The colors on the flag should also be kept as simple as possible, as using a limited number of colors ensures that the flag is not too busy. Furthermore, writing and seals on flags are both problematic. A good flag should not literally spell out what it represents, as writing what you are trying to represent on your flag defeats the purpose of symbols. Additionally, seals are meant for close viewing on documents where small details can be distinguished, but on a flag potentially flying hundreds of feet away, small details run together and can't be identified. Seals and flags have different purposes, so they should stay separate entities. The final principle is to be distinct or be related. Using similar elements as other flags can show connection, but designs should avoid being so similar that it begins to become difficult to distinguish flags from each other. The Minnesota flag fails all 5 guidelines. For reference, here's the state flag flying in St. Paul. The design is not simple. The flag must be screen printed rather than sewn, increasing production costs, and no child could draw it from memory. In fact, the flag is so complicated, you may not have recognized that in this picture, the flag is accidentally flying upside down. The flag fails the second guideline, use meaningful symbolism, because while there are many symbols on the flag, they are so cluttered in the seal that the symbolism is hard to distinguish and lost on many. Ask a Minnesotan what their flag symbolizes, and many won't know. The violations of points 3 and 4 are obvious. The the flag uses 7 colors, and the word Minnesota is written on the flag in the state seal. Finally, point 5's instruction is to be distinct or be related. While a state legislator may be able to find Minnesota among these 20 similar state flags, the average Minnesotan cannot. The flag fails to be distinct, but is too related to other state flags to be easily distinguishable. In a 2001 state and provincial flag survey, NAVA hosted a poll on their website asking its members and the public about flag designs in the US and Canada. It lasted around 3 months, and around 100 NAVA members and 300 members of the public cast around 29,000 votes by the end of the survey, the results of which are shown in this graph. Flags with no seal are green, flags with a seal but without a blue background are in yellow, and flags with a seal and a blue background are shown in blue. The chart makes it evident that seals, especially on flags with a blue background, diminish a flag's standings both in the eyes of professionals and the public. Minnesota's flag ranks 67th out of 72 flags with a score of 3.1 out of 10. Clear evidence of a subpar flag. Thank you.
Welcome to
Jack
the committee.
Kalkman.
State your name for the record.
Jack Kalkman, I go to Michigan Tech. Ted K. of NAVA states, one does not need to be a flag expert to know a good flag design. So foregoing the principles of flag design typically leads to less popularity and recognition. One only infrequently sees the Minnesota flags flying prominently outside a government building. Minnesota's flag does not catch the eye, nor retain a viewer's gaze, nor hold a place in citizens' hearts. Popularity is the ultimate measure of a good flag, so the lack of support makes a pretty clear case that our state flag does not fulfill its purpose. Therefore, to address our substandard flag, we are asking you to continue the progress of House File 505. The bill would not change the flag directly, but rather set up a task force to study design changes. So by passing the bill, you're not committing to a new state flag, merely deciding to look into the issue. Furthermore, the bill would allow task force members to solicit voluntary aid and service of vexillologists and other persons who have either technical or artistic skill in flag construction and design. To see how this could be done, one doesn't have to look much farther than Duluth. Last year, the city of Duluth held a public contest to redesign their city flag. 195 flag designs were submitted by 98 designers ranging from 5 to 70 years old, from which a volunteer committee chose 9 finalists, which the public voted on. The Duluth City Council adopted this design as their new flag of August and last year and is now in place since January. The process not only allowed those with artistic skill to participate, but also citizens got involved with their government. A number of individuals have already been creating new vexillologically sound designs, some of which are shown here. Many emphasize Minnesota's natural beauty and identity as the North Star state, much more revealing than our state's character than a seal on a blue background. For those of you worried about the economic cost of a new flag, this could potentially be offset by the additional merchandising and tourism revenue that a flag could bring, and furthermore, the cost of production of a well-designed flag would be much lower, as well-designed flags are simpler and often can be sewn instead of screen printed. While short-term costs may be incurred, the flag could pay itself off in the longer run. Let's consider the purpose of a flag. A proper flag is a recognizable symbol of a region, flown with pride by its citizens. We Minnesotans have pride in our state, and deservingly so. We have top-ranked public university, our natural beauty rivals that of any other state, and we're stereotyped to being too nice. We're the star of the North, the Toit du Nord. We have so much to be proud of, and we all deserve to be expressed that with our state pride. We all deserve to be expressing our state pride by flying a much well-designed flag. Therefore, we respectfully asking this committee to advance the progress of House File 505 in order to get Minnesotans the flag we all deserve. Thank you.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you to my testifiers. I very much appreciate their expertise on this and would like to open it up for questions at this point in time.
And members, any questions? Representative Albright's on there. I just first want to say is when you talked about the contest, it reminded me that last Friday when I watched Almanac the week before, the question had been how or when was our state bird selected and how was it selected? And there was a contest And the students back in the 50s chose the scarlet tanager and passed that on to the legislature, and the legislature, in its wisdom, chose to ignore that and pick the loon. So that was the question on Almanac is, what is, you know, how did our state bird get a neck pick? So anyway, Representative Albright.
Madam, Mr. Chair, thank you. Representative Fisher and to the testifiers, I want to revert back to a couple of the things that you've mentioned in your presentation. Thank you, by the way. Can you revert back to slide number 6?
Hi, I'm Bixby.
Sorry, guys.
I don't see Bixby up there, but
I was really trying to shut it off.
One of the observations that I would ask is, in the legislative process, we deal with subjective points of view as well as objective information views. Where does NAVA fall in terms of, is this, Mr. Bixby, where do we fall in terms of, is this leaning more towards an objective or a subjective review of the flags that are portrayed on here and in your other slides?
Thank you. So I would say that there's definitely both subjective and objective components to flag design. Of course, some people are going to think that certain flags look better than others. It's a question of aesthetics. But the question, I think, is that how is a flag measured in terms of its success? And I think we say that a flag's success is measured by its popularity. And these points, these principles, they've not been compiled by some vexillologist sitting in an ivory tower think, what do I want flags to look like? They've been compiled by examining flags that the public used and the public liked versus essentially flags that the public didn't know and didn't use. And I'd say Minnesota's flag currently falls into the category where the public doesn't really know what it is and doesn't use it because it's not expressing Minnesota's brand accurately.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going to the vexillological perspective, and you're taking a look at subjective in terms of, you mentioned the popularity or recognition of a flag. Is that subjective or objective based upon the criteria that you set out?
Mr. Atkins.
I would say that popularity can be measured objectively.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the testifier, how would you go about that?
Mr. Atkins.
Essentially, I would measure it in essentially a contest like this, where both members of the public and people that are, familiar with the field of vexillology would be able to rank votes, and essentially you'd see clusterings of flags that the public and those with artistic skill both liked. And in the results of the survey, I won't go into the more detailed results here, but the public generally agreed with the vexillological view that simpler design flags were better and that flags with seals generally were viewed less favorably in both
And
parties.
members, this is kind of getting what the task force would do, but Representative Albright.
And to that point, Mr. Chair, Representative Fisher, you lay out that a task force is going to be established. Who would you envision, or it doesn't lay out in terms of the components of what the task force, who would be involved in that task force? I see Mr. Kelleher in the audience, and so would the Historical Society, who would you envision being on the task force?
In the task,
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the task force, I would imagine that the task force itself primarily would be composed of people appointed from both the House and the Senate. From there, they would be able to bring public in. I would imagine that for the task force that we would be involving people from who are flag experts. We'd probably involve people from the Historical Society. It'd be some of the first groups that we'd be having involved with that, number one, so that we've got the historical context of how things evolved over time, and also help them provide some of the state history. I would also envision that as we're going forward, that we'd probably be at a point where we'd be soliciting designs in, working with flag experts that would help guide us through that process, and then eventually making a recommendation back through to the legislature. And I would envision that we would use some kind of survey process in terms of once we've got the field of flags narrowed down, is putting some kind of public opinion poll out there to get their opinion too and find out what their thoughts are to help guide us in the process.
Representative Albright.
Mr. Chair, does it require a constitutional amendment to change our flag?
Representative Albright, I don't believe so, but maybe Mr. Garing can, has that answer.
Mr. Chair, Representative Albright, the state flag is described in statute, so you can amend statute to change it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Kwong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and simplistic and popularity reminds me of emojis. This task force would have been great probably before we picked the state flag. But since then, there's been some history. The first Minnesotan didn't care, that division didn't care about the popularity of their flag when they fought in the Civil War. And they shed blood in the Civil War. So at some point, we should care about the history of the flag. And, you know, depending on what criteria, if we do the task force, when I hear popular and simple, I think of emojis, and I just, you know, have concerns of a moment in time, we pick a new flag, and we forget the history. But I did on House File 11 notice in the materials that they didn't use a staple. And it actually was functional. So I must commend staff or whoever utilized this as a better way of giving us our materials so we don't have staples. It's easier to process, and we don't use up steel.
Representative, I was just whispered in my ear that all the copy machines that we currently have in the state office building do this instead of stapling them. So I guess I learned something new today also. I've seen that, yes. I've seen that on other bills and other notes that we've gotten. Representative Claiborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Mr. Atkins and Mr. Kalkman. Before you leave today, I would invite you to walk over to the Capitol building. When I think about simplicity and representation, the floor of the rotunda has an awesome design on it that also incorporates the block M. And when I think about what our new flag could look like, I do think it should represent the people of Minnesota. And I thank you for bringing this forward. The people of Plymouth have been asking for something like this for a while. So I think it's a great idea. And to see a school project turn into a passion and then to testifying an activity in the state capitol, I think is really awesome. So thank you for being here today. And history is fluid, and it changes with time. And I think this is a new time in our state where we are more inclusive and more accepting of many, many people. And so I think adapting our flag to represent everyone is a really good thing. So thank you for being here today.
Another comment. Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank Representative Fisher and Mr. Atkins and Kalkman for bringing this bill forward. Two observations. One was when I was running for office, I had two individual people bring me their own flag designs because they believed that our current flag design was, to your point, non-memorable and not particularly compelling. And so this is an issue that constituents in my district are very concerned about. And then when I lived in D.C., our flag was pretty similar to the Chicago flag, and everybody flew it. People wore D.C. flag T-shirts. I saw people with D.C. flag tattoos. There were, D.C. flags in a bunch of houses, and I think that speaks to the recognizable nature of a flag being really popular and compelling. So I just want to thank you for your work, and I fully support it.
So Representative Long, would you have to then get your Minnesota flag tattoo redone?
Yes, only if it became compelling, though. So far, I've held off. I resisted the urge.
Representative Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't anticipating a tattoo, but to the testifier that talked about the tourism uptick with the flag, just curious how you see that unfolding, because I was just taken a little bit back with how would that actually increase tourism? I think that came up in one of the testifiers'
Representative Fisher.
If I could, thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Vogel. I think where a lot of that comes into is it's a brand. You know, our flag becomes a brand. As the brand gets out there, more people recognize what it stands for. And it's kind of like Target. You know, everyone recognizes that big red dot, you know, Target with the dot in it. You know, you don't have to have the word Target under it, and that is what companies use that helps drive people to come to their stores. Likewise, you think one of the ways to think of the state flag is this is the brand of our state. And the more recognizable it is, more people start residing in the back of my mind. Oh yeah, that's the flag of Minnesota. And if it's designed well, you've got, whether it's a North Star or the waves that are on there with the blue and the red, gives the impression of tourism. It may help increase that visibility of what our state is, that we're not just a tundra covered with snow most of the year, that we actually have a lot of different variety out here. And in turn, that increases the likelihood that the people are going to know who we are and come and venture to our state, therefore driving tourism. It comes about that whole brand image.
Mr. Akins.
If I may speak to that as well. So this is kind of a pertinent example. It's spring break right now for high schools and universities everywhere, and a lot of people are going to be taking trips to Colorado. And when they come back, usually they have a sticker or a pin or a t-shirt or a hoodie that has the Colorado flag on it. And I think partly what's driving Colorado's tourism is that when people go there, they have the unified brand of the state flag. You could walk around the halls of our old high school and you'd see Colorado flags everywhere, not flying, but on people's t-shirts or on their backpacks. And so I think that's definitely an example of how tourism and good flag design can both help each other.
Representative Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the follow-up question to that is, if then through these discussions, you're also going to make integral part of those discussions the cost of changing a brand. And I'm not disagreeing with what you're talking about, but when you've had a brand that's been around for as long as this and you start changing it, not only is it the cost of the flag, but it's the cost of everything that goes with it and all those businesses that own flags and everything else that are flying it. And I'm wondering how you're going to approach that in this group so that we get a holistic kind of summary of what will come from this.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Vogel. I'm making notes to make sure that we keep that part in mind. And I think one of the things that first comes to mind is that while the state may have an overall brand of who we are, our flag doesn't represent that right now. Most people don't even recognize what the state flag is when they see it. Number two, I don't really ever see our state flag on anybody's shirts, on their backpacks, et cetera. So in some ways, I think when we start laying it out from that aspect, we're going to find that we've got a lot of opportunities to have greater appeal and greater opportunity for that image to be displayed than we definitely do now.
Representative Vogel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, if this is going to proceed, I really think that needs to be part of the discussion, because whether or not people like the flag or not, it is something that is really our brand on flagpoles and the state as a whole. So I think we would be remiss if we didn't really look at both sides of this and make sure that before we do this, we know what we're getting into, because it's going to affect a lot of different things. Thank you.
Representative Keel, you'll be the last questioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to kind of go a little farther than Representative Vogel. When we talk about our brand, first of all, young men, I really thank you for this project. And I always like seeing high school students come here and have a conversation about different issues. But I get a little concerned about just picking a moment in time. That flag to me says a lot about Minnesota. And when I look at I know it's hard to see, but when I look at that, it describes Minnesota. It isn't just the Star of the North. We are an agricultural state, very large in agriculture. It says that. It says there's at least what my description in my brain is. It talks about mining, and there's water there. And we're proud of all of those things. And so that talks about who we are and what we represent. And so if we're going to consider changing the flag, to make it simplify, we also want to tell people who we are. And I think that that's an important thing to remember. All of the investment that, or all of how Minnesota's been developed. And so I get a little concerned about just taking a moment in time and saying, here's what we should do, when in fact we need to think back at how we were developed and where we've gone. So it's just something for thought. And I thank you boys for, young men, for, participating and wish you the best in this project.
And members, that's what the commission would, all those things that the last few things we talked about is what the commission would do. Gentlemen, the only thing I can see that in your presentation that you might have slowed down was the, when you showed the Duluth flag, and we could have asked our representative from Duluth if she knew what the flag was, and, anyway. With that, members, I'll renew my motion that House File 505 be re-referred to the Ways and Means Committee. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The motion is passed.
Thank you.